Well, Dean Robinson, I am so excited to have you coming all the way to us from the down under. Welcome to the Chasing Unleashed podcast, my friend.
Thank you, Dan. Great pleasure. You know what? I see one of the biggest issues, particularly when you've got spouses in business with each other, is that the conversation about business does never stop. And you need to have a point where that stops at the end of the day. So whether it's, when you sit down to dinner or when you finish dinner or when you knock off work for the day, it's got to stop. Because otherwise, if you're not careful, the only conversation you will have as spouses is around the business. And that probably then highlights the weakness of the overall relationship. Too many people in business, it's almost like they get obsessed with their business to the point where it's the only thing in their life, and it's not. The business has to support the ideals of the family, in my opinion. And unfortunately, there's too many people that have it the other way around.
And candid communication is really important. I've had conversations with clients in similar situations, and I've used the word vulnerability because sometimes I think that we as humans are adverse to being vulnerable, thinking it's a sign of weakness and somebody else gets the upper hand. And I actually think vulnerability is a sign of strength because you're willing to be vulnerable. I'd like to hear your response on the importance of vulnerability, candor, and straightforward communication in a family business where emotions will run high.
Well, I think that's where you've got to have someone who is a third party. One of the downsides I find when, particularly when spouses are in business, or even it's kind of sometimes not spouses, sometimes it's brothers. Like I have a business where there's three brothers involved, or sometimes it's mum and dad and sons, or some mum and dad and daughters. We talk to each other like we talk to each other at home around the dinner table in the business. And you can't talk to each other like that. If you've got three brothers in business and you're all part of the management team, you've actually got to talk as managers in a management team, not as brothers, rumbling on the ground like you were when you were 9 years old, right? And so ultimately, so the example I've got there with the three brothers is every now and then I have to tell one of the three brothers, you got to zip it, mate. You just shut up for a minute. Let him have something to say, because there's always a dynamic. You have three, you've got two girls, and they know they're completely different to each other, no doubt, because my two sons are chalk and cheese, right? And so what you'll have is often you'll have a dominant personality and you'll have a passive personality. And the passive personality, if then you're not careful, they'll just keep holding back. And you've got to sort of draw that out of them every now and then. And the dominant personality just has to be sort of put in his box for a minute. Sounds a bit unfair, just to allow the other person to speak. Because, in one example, I know one sibling in a business doesn't say a lot, but what he says is gold.
Yeah.
And he just won't pipe up until someone says, well, unless there's a really contentious issue, or unless, his older brother actually just zips it for a moment.
You and I are part of a global mastermind group, and I've had the great honor of being able to talk to you on a regular basis now for, heck, I think it's like somewhere around 3 years.
It is.
And it's been a ton of fun. And one of the topics that we had, and I think this deals with emotion. I think you made the comment about boredom. About some of us who are entrepreneurs, especially, but it could be for anybody, that there's this, I don't know, who used, I think 7 years, maybe it's a whole 7-year itch thing. That at some point, you kind of you're really good at something, you're skilled, you're an expert, you've got great experience, and heck, you might be very successful from a financial standpoint by doing something, but at some point, you get bored, right?
Yep.
I'm not having fun now. I'm making money, and we're living a good life. So hell, I can't do anything different. But at some point, I think you and I have both gone through that, and we go through transitions, and change is part of it. But I think there's an emotional dynamic where each one of us hits a point where, okay, we got to move, we got to change. And I think it plays a part of emotion. And I think sometimes people, even in a family business, can get bored with what they're doing. I'd love your commentary before we go. I'd love your commentary on that whole part of, because people listening to Chasing Unleashed are constantly chasing that unleashed level. And sometimes you have that 7-year itch or the midlife crisis, and it's not a bad thing. It actually can be a good thing for your emotional state. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I actually call it the crisis of boredom.
The crisis, that was it. That's what you said. That I love that. I wrote it down somewhere and then I forgot. The crisis of boredom. Talk about it, Dean.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I see it happen. It usually is it's a 5-year trajectory, right? So the first 5 years, people are in business and they're trying to do everything possible where they look after every client that walks in the door, right? And they'll sort of work late, start early to make sure that everyone's happy. And then the second 5 years, things start to plateau out a little bit. They've taken on, staff. They might have moved into premises after being stuck in their back garden shed or whatever it may well be. But the third 5 years is actually where you tend to see, between 11 and 15, years 11 and 15 is where you tend to see things plateau out a little bit. Now, the reason they plateau out a bit is because part of it is actually a bit of hubris, right? So people are just, they don't have any humility. They think, oh, I've done this. Right. And I've seen people in business that have said, oh, great, I'm a great electrical contractor. I think I can go and develop property now. And it's like, what are you doing that for? And it's because they think that because they've become king of the hill in their little part of the world that they've done, that they can go and just replicate that elsewhere. And I've seen it trash businesses, Dan. I really have. Yeah. Now, the thing is, you've got to work out in that sort of that third 5-year period, years 11 to 15, if you're flatlining, you actually may not be flatlining, you might be dropping. It's just that, for instance, you're doing work for people. So your customers keep coming back, your clients keep coming back simply out of habit, not because they actually, want you to do it. They just haven't found anyone else yet. And so invariably, it actually becomes a point where you've either got to A, reinvent the business, B, be prepared to sort of have it, I call it ski downhill fast, which I don't ski, right? Look, we don't have much snow in Australia.
Yeah, no, I know.
And or C is sell it.
And so I think that, as we talk about emotion, I think that boiling point sometimes for folks might be they've hit a point where they have to do one of what you said. But I guess I'd always encourage, the reinvention. When you plan about it, it makes sense. And I think it gives you that greater emotional kick in the ass that sometimes we all need.
Yeah. Look, everyone wants to remain relevant. And I think the issue is for a lot of people is they get to a point in their business life where they don't feel they're as relevant as they are, or there's a different purpose. So yes, there are people that need to reinvent themselves. Now, some people can reinvent themselves in that business. It just morphs into a different beast.
Right.
But I have seen other people where they have had to sell out of that business, and that's been a smart move, right? Because, for instance, it may be at a point where they can sort of bank a big check, and then they can use the proceeds to go and do something completely different again.